Everybody, I'm gonna share my screen. Before we get started, just wondering, is there anybody in the room not from Hawaii? Everybody's, is everybody on Oahu?
I'm
Okay, okay. Guess everybody's on the same island. Okay, hold on here. Let me share. Hopefully this works. Uh-oh, where did it go? Okay, you see my screen?
yeah.
Okay, hi say.
I didn't.
One Brandon Ufugusuku ing di choibing. Um, うん。生まれ育ち、ハワイルエビシが生アガトアルゼンティナから花ちょいびんやたさるぶとウニゲイサビラ。So hi everybody, I'm Brandon. Most of you know me. I know most of you. I was born and raised in Hawaii. However, right now I am joining you all from South America. I'm in Argentina, visiting my wife's family and friends. She was born and raised here. Talk a little bit more about that a little bit later too. So very grateful to have the opportunity to talk at the STEMS² Symposium. And I was originally given 30 minutes, but I was told that I can go up to 60. So yeah, so with that in mind, because there's a lot to talk about with Uchinaaguchi, with the Okinawan language. So I wanted to share a little bit about myself for those that are not familiar, and even those that do know me, maybe there's something to share that you weren't aware of. I want to talk a little bit brief kind of background, a little bit of history about the Okinawan language, and then talk more about what some of the things that I've been doing to try and keep the language alive, try to reclaim it, revitalize it. Okay. So itasarugutu unige sabira. So a little dushirashi, little self-introduction. And if at any time you have questions, comments, whatever, just unmute yourself. Because I can see the chat, but I might miss something if I'm in my own bubble here. Okay. But yeah, fourth generation on my mom's side. My mom is an Oshiro, which is why I put Ufugusuku in my self-introductions. That is the indigenous way of saying Oshiro. It's the third most common Okinawan last name. And I think we have enough people in here familiar, but you guys know the most common Okinawan last name is? Yes, it is Higa. So
Teacher.
yeah, Shija. Yeah. So fourth generation on my mom's side. One Kaneohe Maritan. So I was raised in Kaneohe on east side of Oahu. Oops, wrong way. Sorry. So I grew up with an Uchinaaguchi identity, and I realized later I'm very fortunate to have grown up around the music and the performing arts. My grandma danced Okinawan dance. My grandpa played the sanshin, probably the most recognizable of our traditional instruments. And they always told us we were Uchinanju, but I didn't really know what that meant. We went to Okinawan festivals. We ate sata andagi. My grandma made sweet potato andagi. But beyond that, I wouldn't really be able to tell you at that time what it meant to be Okinawan. Because even in Hawaii, even though we have so many Okinawans, as a lot of you know, we often get misidentified as being Japanese or some form of Japanese. So growing up, again, if someone asked me what's the difference, I wouldn't have been able to answer. And at one point, I remember, oops, let me know if my sound gets weird because my microphone, I'm getting is that my microphone is, oh shucks. But yeah, growing up, I remember there's a time when it was easier to tell people that, so I'm Chinese on my dad's side, Okinawan on my mom's side. And when you try to tell people that, a lot of people will say, what's Okinawan? Everybody knows what Chinese is. If it was any other ethnicity, nobody would question, nobody would argue. But when you say Okinawan, people they either question it or they argue. Why you say Okinawan? It's the same thing as being Japanese. So at one point it was easier, I'm not proud that my mindset changed in this way, but I used to tell people I'm Chinese Japanese because it was just easier to you didn't have to explain it. But as I grew older, I realized, if people don't know, then we got to tell them. So yeah, that was my. Oh, hi. So in 2005, okay, I that's kind of really when I guess my journey started with the identity, and I started learning to play Sanshin at UH Manoa from Norman Kaneshiro. And to this day, I consider him my Sanshin teacher. And yeah, so again, through Norman, through learning Sanshin, I started, opening my eyes, opening my mind to more about the culture, more about the history, and what our ancestors went through after coming to Hawaii, even because as I mentioned, my grandparents told us we were Okinawan, and we knew a little bit about the discrimination that Okinawans faced, but we didn't know why. And later on, talking to other elders, we realized that Okinawans came about 20 years after the first Japanese came. So the Japanese had already established themselves in Hawaii. When Okinawans arrived, this was after they were annexed to become part of Japan. So Okinawans came in the 1900 as Japanese citizens, but they didn't speak Japanese. They didn't look like Japanese. Of course, they didn't have money yet because they just arrived. So all those things, kind of led to some of those, the discrimination that our ancestors faced. In 2009, I went to Okinawa to study Sanshin mostly. And that's when I got involved with Uchinaaguchi. That's when I realized that people don't speak it. That's when I realized that that's when I realized it's a language. I didn't even realize that until well into my adulthood and actually going to Okinawa and learning about it there. In 2014, came to Argentina to spend some time with my wife and her family. And interestingly enough, a lot of the elders, the Okinawan elders here, they still use the language amongst themselves. They use it with each other. But just like back in Okinawa, they didn't pass it down to the younger generation. So there is interest here as well, but yeah, not a lot of people are able to speak Okinawan language. So yeah, I'll come back to this picture and this family here. That is my father-in-law, his sister, and well, actually, I'll mention right now. Interesting, also very interesting. My father-in-law was born in Okinawa right after the war, and he grew up in a time when you couldn't speak Okinawan at school, right? They were punished if they spoke it. And he came to Argentina when he was 16. And according to him, he learned more Uchinaaguchi after moving to Argentina because the community here was, they didn't face any pressure to assimilate to anybody. So yeah, so when he speaks with his friends and his sisters, it's this really interesting mix of Okinawan and Spanish and a little bit of Japanese too. So yeah, a lot of them are basically trilingual here. Fast forwarding to the present, I am currently an elementary school teacher. Aside from that, I do Uchinaaguchi classes with Uppanshin Kabudan, of which my Sanshin teacher, Norman, is one of the co-founders, along with Eric Wada and Keith Nakaganeko, another co-director. And I'm also currently a student at Kahakaula Oke'eli Kolani, part of UH and I'm in their Indigenous Language and Cultural Revitalization doctorate program. And still got a long way to go, but yeah, I'm on that path. Okay. So a little bit of background on Uchinaaguchi. Again, some of you are familiar. I prepared this not knowing who would be attending. So yes, you might know some of this information already. But Uchinaaguchi is the indigenous language of present-day Okinawa, which was the center of the Ryukyu Kingdom. So the language was the lingua franca of the Ryukyu Kingdom. And it's one of 6 major Ryukyu language groups, and there are hundreds of variants contained within those groups. Geographically, it represents the language of central and kind of south central Okinawa Island. The kingdom was annexed and forced to become part of Japan in 1879, which included fierce assimilation efforts to become Japanese. And the Ryukyu languages were all recognized by UNESCO in 2009 as endangered. And again, coincidentally, that's when I went to Okinawa. So the first class that I took of Uchinaaguchi, that's one of the things that I learned, that it's an endangered language, which I didn't even, I had no idea. So yeah, a little bit more about Uchinaaguchi. Of course, under Japanese assimilation policies, all Ryukyu languages were prohibited. Students were punished for speaking Uchinaaguchi at school. We see a picture here of a student with what they call the Hogen Fuda around his neck, and it's a punishment saying that I spoke the dialect. So a couple of things going on there. Of course, students being punished, but they're also forcing kids to call it the dialect, putting it as an inferior, like a subset of Japanese almost, yeah. And then what would happen, we're told that these kids would, in order to get rid of that Hogen Fuda, they would have to wait for another student to speak something of Uchinaaguchi. So a lot of elders say they would hit their friend or step on their foot just to make them say aga. And aga just means ouch. And it's enough Uchinaaguchi that they would be able to punish their friends for speaking it too. So you can imagine how it created a mindset of how this language is bad to even think of speaking for many. Oops, sorry. Getting on to World War II, Battle of Okinawa. And just coincidentally, June 23rd, yesterday, is the day that marks the end of the Battle of Okinawa, to console the hundreds of thousands of lives lost in that battle. We often hear about Okinawans hiding in caves, hiding in family tombs. And as the war was coming to an end, American soldiers would try to get them out to surrender. And I've heard stories of how the Americans would learn these Japanese phrases to tell the people, come out, it's safe. But the Okinawans inside, they're not Japanese speakers. On top of that, they hear a strange voice and a strange accent speaking. So they didn't come out, and hundreds of them inside those caves would just get blown up. And on the other side of that, we hear stories of how soldiers that were complicated to explain in a short time, but soldiers born in Hawaii of Okinawan descent were fighting on the American side. And because they could speak Okinawan, they would go to these caves, other caves, and explain to them in Okinawan, it's safe to come out. You're not going to be hurt. And because of that, hundreds of lives were also saved. One thing we don't hear as much about is the fact that Japanese soldiers had orders to execute civilians speaking Ryukyu languages. Just a couple of weeks ago, I met a woman who says that her family members during the war were actually decapitated for speaking Uchinaaguchi. Yeah. So again, we can't blame, when we think of elders not wanting to pass on the language and just having this mental block and this mindset that they shouldn't speak anymore. It can be frustrating for us who want to learn, but at the same time, you really can't blame them because of what they've gone through. After the war, political control of Okinawa was given to the US until 1972. And what's really surprising is that the US tried to promote Okinawan culture or Ryukyuan languages too. But what I've read is that the Okinawans, they didn't trust the Americans. They felt, and with good reason, they kind of felt like they were trying to divide and conquer further by making the Okinawans feel very separated from Japan. So it didn't work. And the education system went back to Japanese standards, and again back to the prohibition of Okinawan language. And of course, that leads us to the idea that losing your language leads to losing your culture and identity. And even in Hawaii, a lot of Okinawans stopped speaking, or at least stopped trying to pass on the language to their youth. Yeah. A couple words for you, Uchinaaguchi and Uchinaaguchi. Anyone know the difference between these two words? I'm sure some of you do, but if you're not sure, you want to take a guess?
Uh, so Ushidanchu is an Okinawan person, and then Uchinaaguchi is the language.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Toby. Good. So yeah, talking about losing your language and identity, right? So these words come from our language. And so if they disappeared, these words would technically disappear too. And we wouldn't have any word of our own to describe ourselves or to describe our language. Now, keep in mind, we do have other words that people use to talk about our identity and our language, but those would also disappear. And again, we'd have to only describe ourselves through the language of other people, other cultures. Quick story to tie into that. In college, I worked part-time, and one of my supervisors was a guy from Japan. Nice guy. And we talked a lot. And one day he noticed I was wearing a wristband that said Uchinanchu Pride that I must have got from the Okinawan festival that year. And remember at that time I still wasn't too sure how to explain all these cultural things. So he asked me, what is Uchinanchu, being a Japanese person. And for me, again, not even realizing that our language was our language, completely separate from Japanese, I was kind of surprised that he asked me, what is that word? Like, I almost felt like he should know. So I told him it's an Okinawan person, not knowing any other way to explain any further. And he said really bluntly, oh, there's no such word as Uchinanchu. And I was so shocked, because this is a word that I grew up all my life. Like, we have a whole community of us that we call ourselves that. So how can how can someone suddenly tell us that we don't even exist? Like telling us that Uchinan, the word doesn't exist, is almost like saying that we don't exist. And I came to realize later it's because he doesn't know Okinawan language, and he doesn't know that there's a difference. He's one of those people that, if you have a conversation and say Okinawans are not Japanese, he'll say, what are you talking about? Of course, they're the same thing. Yeah, he just didn't know. He never learned. He's out of his ignorance, and he made that comment. Yeah. Okay. So some statistics now. Every year, the two major Okinawan newspapers, they put out data that the Okinawa prefecture collects. And they have all these different question sets that they survey people about regarding Shimakutuba, as they refer to it. And I don't know when they started collecting data, but you can search for it online. And the most recent one I could find is from 2024. But if you look at these numbers, it's a little alarming. I mean, a little concerning, right? Or maybe very concerning. Because in 2013, only 10% of people surveyed said they speak mostly Uchinaaguchi. And you can imagine they're elders, right? And over the years, it drops and drops. And the most recent data shows only 3.4% use mostly Uchinaaguchi. The other half the time, meaning that half the time they use Uchinaaguchi, the other half they just use they use Japanese language. So down you can see from 25%, because even halftime, that's something. It's pretty good. But now it's 13%. It's up from the year before. So that's hopeful, right? The ones that use only for greetings, which, yeah, again, it's something. 26% now compared to 23% 11 years ago. So that's actually an increase. So again, hopeful. So hopefully, these greetings and half the time will, just like how teachers look at test scores, right? We want the purples to move into blues. We want But of course, only time will tell. If we look at the ones that don't use Uchinaaguchi at all, that also increased, right? From 14% in 2013, it went up, then came back down a little bit, but almost 20% don't use any Uchinaaguchi in Okinawa. So, yeah. There's other data that I looked at, and while the newspaper celebrated that there's an increase in these two categories, I think if I understood correctly, the goal by now was to have these three categories add up to 80%, but it's still only like 40 something percent now. They do have initiatives, but yeah, it looks like they're not, unfortunately, not working as well as they wanted to. Yeah. But then something that's not as hopeful is that other data shows that people don't feel it's that important for younger people to learn the language. People are feeling less and less, they feel it's less important to add language to the school curriculum, which is obviously, a good place for it to be. But yeah, people don't care that much about it. Okay. So now I want you all to think back to your own childhood, especially if you can remember your elementary school days. If you remember any songs that you sang in class, yeah, no judgment, but if you want to put it in the chat, if you want to unmute yourself, just any songs. Because even now, a lot of people say, yeah, music is probably the greatest way to remember stuff, to learn stuff. Oh, Ashibina. And that was at school, okay? Okay. So you still remember them now, Lily, you're saying, yeah? Days of the week. Okay, okay. Got it, okay, thank you.
Remember, we used to sing a lot of patriotic songs at the beginning of the day. Back in my time. That's what we used to do.
Yeah. Patriotic meaning like American.
Yeah. Right? God bless America, America the
right.
Beautiful, that kind.
Oh, Musunde, or Japanese song. English colors. Oh, yeah. Okay. So yeah, I also remember those patriotic songs, but yeah, so thank you for sharing. But what I did want to connect with from my own memories of going to school in Hawaii, we're learning Hawaiian, well, songs to learn the Hawaiian body parts, Hawaiian colors, numbers. Because that's, for me, that sticks with me, for whatever reason, that I remember those a lot more vividly than the other songs that we used to sing. Another song we used to sing at Heia Elementary was Hawaiʻi loa kulike kako. And I think that's so interesting when I think about it now. It's basically a, almost a protest song that we learned to sing. And to this day, I remember singing it in elementary, and I think it was really cool that we did. And I think, I want to think that this kind of helped shape my mindset as I grew older and I got involved with Okinawan language and trying to perpetuate it. To talk a little bit more about my influence growing up in Hawaii and going to elementary school, I still have my 6th grade Hawaiian studies notebook. I'm not sure why I kept it all these years, but again, I like to think it really shows how connected I felt and how much I respected, the place that I grew up, even though my ancestors came from outside. So, when I lived in Okinawa, after my study program, I stayed to teach English. And sometimes we would have these cultural exchange days where the English teachers would go to different schools and we'd have stations and we'd talk about the place that we grew up. And I always tried to make sure I shared things that I learned as a child in Hawaii growing up, and I'd share that with the students there. And this ended up, I ended up talking to a lot of the Okinawan teachers about this, about how in Hawaii it's basically the law that we learn Hawaiian culture and some Hawaiian language, at least in in any public elementary school. And I would tell them that would be great if something like that existed in Okinawa, because as I worked at the schools there, I noticed there was pretty much nothing. There's no curriculum for Okinawan culture, and a lot of them, a lot of the ones that I talked to, they agreed. They thought that would be a cool idea too, but they always said that there's no time in the curriculum. There's no time in the day because everything is, just strict Japan education system standards, and to try to make time for Okinawan language would just take away too much time from other things. Keep in mind, there's no law restricting teaching of other languages at school in Japan. I thought there was, but there's no policy restricting it. But it's just because everyone is so concerned with the Japanese standards that they don't try to touch it. There were some schools that after school that have like a little club once a week where elders would come and teach the kids Okinawan, but otherwise, in general, there was really nothing. So one thing that I ended up doing, I said, okay, if they're not gonna allow time in the regular curriculum, I have a lot of control over the English curriculum. So with a lot of different things came together for this, but the idea came to me, well, I'm gonna make a song that explains Okinawan. It's gonna use English language to explain some Okinawan words, and then we can put it into the English class. So that's what I ended up doing. And to explain that a little bit more, I'm just going to show you this short video that I made for one of my other classes. But it is a true story. Started with a broken washing machine. So I'll play this for you. I tried to speak in Uchinaaguchi through this, and so there's English subtitles. So.
昔々、ある那智のフィルサがいぬくとやいびいたん。あきさみよ、ワンチンあらやの氷とおるもん、ちゃんならん。あんいいがち、おふぐすこやコインランドリンかいいちゃびたん。三心無賃じ、あれもまっちょるえだ、歌しびそういびいたん。あったに、しぶるんかい歓迎のうかじちゃびたん。And thank you, mi fe de ru. やさ、これ、わった英語の授業さにちかりしがや。
Oops. Okay, so, oops. Wait, hold on. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, a bunch of ideas came together, including just being tired of teaching the same songs in the English class, which some of the other teachers felt the same way. But yeah, that's how the idea of Let's Sing Uchinaaguchi came to be. So to talk a little bit more about what I'm doing, what I have been doing, and continue to try to do. So when I think about, who are we storing for? Who am I doing this work for? At first, it started off for the Okinawan students, because yeah, even though at that time I was only at the very beginning of my Uchinaaguchi learning, the kids didn't even know how to say thank you in their own language, because yeah, they're raised only learning Japanese, and then in school they're taught that they got to learn English, so they don't get to hear Okinawan unless they're getting scolding by their grandparents. So they knew some words about some of those types of words, but regular everyday words they didn't get to hear. Sorry. So yeah, again, starting off with the kids in Okinawa, because I had some friends, Uchinanshu from Brazil, that helped me make a animated video for it, and using the internet, we're able to share it with people across outside of Okinawa, back home in Hawaii, and I realized that it had value for not only kids in Okinawa, but kids outside of Okinawa too. And not only kids, but also everyone, everyone, who's interested in the Okinawan language. So yeah. And just a quick note about the video I showed you. I didn't forget to take my laundry in real life. I showed that to my daughter, and that was her reaction. Hey, you forgot your laundry. But okay. So again, children's songs. I also ended up later on branching out to try to create more contemporary sounding music using only Uchinaaguchi, to try to prove a point that our language is not only for traditional purposes, it's not only old people talking. There's also a stigma that in Okinawa, if you use Uchinaaguchi, again, that's for the elders, or it's for what they call Yankee, which are basically like, these punk kids that, they're rebels, and that's why they're not going to speak proper Japanese. They're going to use Uchinaaguchi. But yeah, it's for all of us, right? And then we also do community language classes with Ukwanshin Kobudan. But yeah, today we'll just focus more on the music part. So yeah, just to kind of explain that, let's sing Uchinaaguchi series, 5 words, real basic words. Chu ganabira, which is a formal way to say hello. Kwachi sabira, meaning you're gonna feast. You say it before you eat. When you're done, you could say Kwachi sabitan. Unige sabira is asking a favor. It's a way to say please. And then Nife debiru is one way to say thank you. This guy here, he's one of the people that I learned Uchinaaguchi from in Okinawa. And I just put his picture there in his book because reading his book, that's kind of how I got some of these ideas for these basic words, and just starting off with basic stuff instead of trying to speak, just vocab first. One thing I really wanted to make sure to do is include student voices, to have some ownership for them, create a space for them to reclaim their language. And I taught at 3 different schools in my years in Okinawa, and everywhere I went, I'll show them on the first day of English class, and then we would end up singing it at every English class. And fortunately, the kids liked it, and hopefully they still remember it now. But there were days when I was tired of hearing my own voice in the classroom, so I would tell them, I would try to skip it, and not say anything, and almost every time they would say, "Hey, what about let's sing that song." So yeah, so here's a short clip. You can hear the students' voices at the end of this particular clip here.
And thank you,
Yeah, so again, the kids really enjoyed it, and it did gain a little bit of publicity in Okinawa. There was a teacher at the school, her husband worked for one of the major newspapers, and then I had a friend at one of the other newspapers, so both of them ran stories about the song, and how we're mixing English and Uchinaaguchi in the classroom. And yeah, so it's a lot of fun at the same time. Throughout the years, I made some other songs. As you can see, not a whole bunch, but they're all on YouTube. And yes, I still get comments that some people still like to listen to them often. So that's really wonderful to hear. And then to kind of show how I try to have other voices, not only to record it, but also to kind of learn from it myself. Well, the second song that I made was kind of a self-introduction song, and kind of going back to the influence of growing up in Hawaii. I remember having to learn this song where we introduce ourselves to each other. O wai ko inoa, what is your name? And then the other person, so if it's Connie, she would respond, O Connie ko inoa, Connie is my name. And while the music itself sounds very different, I just remember that was my idea. Like, we need to have a way for these kids to say what their name is to each other. So that was the second song. In the third one, I had some elders input, and I'll get into more detail on that one. The fourth song, I asked my niece who lives in Washington State to record a little bit on that. The next one, the Hawaii United Okinawa Association, every summer they do a children's day camp for about 4 days. And one year, actually with the help of Connie, we were able to get a bunch of their voices to record a line to put into that song. Volume 6 was just me on my own. I didn't have anybody helping me on that one. But then the last one I've done, which we finished last year, my daughter singing on that one too. And so that was a lot of fun to make as well. Yeah. Okay, so getting to this idea of having our elders input, our shija, I really love showing these two images side by side. These characters here in the animation, they were thought up, right? They were created in 2011, if you think about it. I met my wife in 2012, and I met my in-laws. I met my father-in-law and his sisters, and not till 2014. But when you look at the resemblance, it's really it's really cool how much they resemble each other. So yeah, but I also wanted to show the input that we got from them for this particular song. We have a little dialogue that they recorded for us here, so I'll play that now.
Ari, mido sanaya ganju eti.
Ganju yando?
Cuya mau kay cuya.
Nachiwan kay sundo? Yamanjay kani.
Anse wani maju itisa.
Okay. All right. So kind of the importance of having community engagement, especially within our communities, this idea of internal advocacy, being that we have a lot of Okinawans in South America as well. And also to thank my friends from Brazil who helped me with the first song. I made a version that uses Portuguese instead of English. And of course, I had to get help with that, learning the words and the pronunciation. When we left Okinawa, so that's where I met my wife. When we left Okinawa, she brought a file of the Portuguese version to the Okinawan Association here in Argentina, kind of as a gift. Like, look, this is what people are doing with the language. And I remember her telling me, it's kind of as a joke that they told her, but they said, "Oh, thank you, but we don't speak Portuguese. We speak Spanish, right?" So that's where we decided, okay, let's make a Spanish version too. So she helped me with Spanish and pronunciation, everything like that too. So yeah, again, community outside of Okinawa, but also staying within Okinawa. Again, with some of the newspapers, they covered it, but I also got to talk a little bit and perform the song at a Shima Kutuba Taikai, a festival of the language, basically. It's a real small one, and I got involved because I was taking a class with kids. So it was for kids, but they let me sit in the back, but they asked me to be a part of that as well. Yeah. Another part of community engagement, again, making sure we keep involved with Okinawa. This is one thing that someone else kind of helps me out with. Every year, there's a group of high school performing arts students that comes to Oahu. And in their activities, they usually visit Yukie Shiroma Shinshi and her dance class. And she choreographed a simple dance for my song for kids at the day camp. But now she teaches it to anybody that walks in the doors of her dance studio. So here's a clip of these Okinawan students in Hawaii dancing to Let's Sing Uchinaaguchi. So again, so hopefully, when they experience these kind of things, you see people taking video. Those are members of the Okinawa delegation too. The hope is that when they go back home, they remember it and they kind of think, okay, you know, in Hawaii, there's people who care about the language. Let's also care about it back home and you know, do stuff to promote it. I don't know if that is what happens, but that definitely would be ideal. So from internal engagement, we talk about external engagement, outside engagement. On the left, this is a picture of my classroom at Lanakila Elementary School. This was a few years ago, but you know, once in a while, when we're trying to kind of give them a break from all the core subjects, I'll teach them some Okinawan stuff. And, you know, they really like to learn about any kind of cultural thing. So that's really great about working with kids too. On the right, this is from WIPSI, World Indigenous Peoples Conference on Education, held in Aotearoa last year. We got to speak about this project as well. And one thing to mention about WIPSI real quick, the WIPSI Instagram account, you know, they will highlight the different groups throughout the conference. And when they highlighted the Okinawan group, so there were 3 of us from Hawaii and 3 from Okinawa. We met there and we did a couple of presentations together. But it got a lot of attention on social media. And part of the reason was because a lot of people were arguing in the comments about, are Okinawans, should they really be considered indigenous? And a lot of people that are trying to argue against us, I doubt they were Okinawan themselves. So, you know, get back to this idea of, you know, why do people always have to argue? You know, we know who we are, you know, and it's just really interesting how people feel like they have to assert their opinions when they have nothing to do really with the culture or the identity. So yeah, that was WIPSI. Again, beyond the kids' songs, the Warabi Uta set up for language learning, I try to create more contemporary sounding music. And I've been able to, I've had the privilege of speaking about it and also performing some of that music in Los Angeles, in Okinawa, and of course also in Honolulu. Now, one tricky thing is trying to stay grounded in, you know, in tradition, or staying true to the culture, not trying to abandon just traditional stuff. And, you know, one way I try to do that is by incorporating more cultural aspects, including like proverbs, or even sometimes lyrics straight out of folk songs or melodies out of folk songs. But again, while trying to create something for hopefully a broader audience. So again, we can get, you know, people to at least know about us, about our language. Yeah, so coming up, almost finishing up here. Again, back to this idea of losing language equating to losing identity. The flyer here is for the worldwide Uchinaaguchi festival, which happens every 5 years in Okinawa. People from Uchinaaguchi, Okinawans from around the world, go to Okinawa, celebrate our identity, our culture. But just, you know, just looking at the way they write Uchinaaguchi on the flyer, for me, as someone who's been working with the language or trying to work with the language for a while, I think it kind of shows when you either know or don't know, or don't really care that much, or not paying attention to what people are doing with their language. Just, yeah, it might seem like a real small detail for some, but just the way we write Uchinaaguchi with that na as a long vowel, there's a couple of different ways that we try to do that. But to me, if you write Uchinaaguchi, it shows that, yeah, you either don't know or you unfortunately don't care. Kind of a quote from Sheila Nicholas. She's an indigenous Native American scholar. She said, if we don't work on this language issue, we'll be, so she's a Hopi. So in her quote is, we'll be Hopi in name only. But, you know, you can really switch that out with any, you know, any culture. Will be Uchinaaguchi in name only. And again, without the language, that name really doesn't mean anything. So the last thing I'll talk about that I've tried to do, every time they have the festival coming up, they'll call out for, you know, people to submit ideas for theme songs. And I tried it 2 separate times. And unfortunately, one of the guidelines, it used to be a rule, maybe 10, I guess 15 years ago, it was a rule. Now it's a guideline. The song should be in Japanese, which is, you know, really unfortunate that that they feel that way, because it's supposed to celebrate our culture, and the language is pretty much our culture. So to say we cannot have a theme song for this festival in our own language, it really feels kind of backwards. But we have friends that are trying to petition to change that rule. So we'll see what happens. The next festival would be next year, 2027. Okay, so looking to the future. Again, if you remember the statistics, there's some glimmers of hope, but also some not so positive looking data. I think what we need is people to just recognize us, acknowledge that our language exists. Going to the Okinawan festival in Honolulu, I'm tired of seeing people walking around with shirts that say arigato, or they say Japan, and to me they don't realize that when you go to Okinawan festival, it's because the Okinawan culture it's its own thing. Because I think that would help. Again, having that acknowledgement would help people feel stronger about their identity, and especially back in Okinawa, because we could try all we want to promote the language here, but I think back in Okinawa, that's where if they don't change their mindset, then we're in a lot more trouble there. But yeah, so it's all about recognition, acknowledging who we are, having that pride, and I would hope that helps people be more enthusiastic about the language. Did want to mention, on social media, there are a few Okinawan content creators that they use a lot of Okinawan vocabulary. And I think maybe that's the reason that we see an increase in people using greetings and maybe trying to speak more, like half the time. But then again, the amount of people that use mostly Uchinaaguchi is dropping. So hopefully we see a change there as well. I'd like to finish off with a proverb. Marijima no kutaba wa shi ne, kunin wa shiun. Kunin wa shi ne, oyang wa shiun. And what that's saying is, to forget the language of your homeland is to forget your homeland itself. And if you forget your homeland, you're forgetting your parents, you're forgetting your ancestors, you're forgetting all that they've taught, you're forgetting all that they've gone through, to kind of remember what our ancestors have gone through the war, through forced assimilation, oppression, continued oppression, and what was I going to say? Yeah, but to just remember those humble beginnings, because nowadays there are a lot of Okinawans in Hawaii that in positions of power, politics, educators, doctors, and it's real important for us to remember where we come from, and make sure that we operate with a mindset where we don't look down on others. We try to uplift those communities that are marginalized, like Dr. John Osorio was talking about earlier. We really have to accommodate each other and function in a way that that we help each other out. And so so that's about it for me. I think we don't have that much time left for me, but Ipe ni he debiru. Here's some of my social media stuff if you want to follow or stay connected. Okay.
We don't get to thank you enough for everything that you do. Ipe ni he debiru.